The Corridoctor says on the backside, makes hallucinogens obsolete. You know what you're in for it when you read it. And then we have, of course, the laundry novels.
Well, I've always had a sneaking fondness for the spy thriller. In fact, looking back, one of my regrets is that the Cold War ended in 1989. And the Cold War was horrible, let's face it. It was not a good time to be around. You know, you were always afraid that some idiot would accidentally lean on the wrong button and kill us all. But, you know, if you want to write spy thrillers, it was wonderful. And I've always liked the sort of sense of creeping paranoia that went with them. And I've always had a little bit of an affection for this character as well, the Lovecraftian horror side of things. In the mid to late 90s, one of my projects was a short story titled A Colder War. It was
found in here among others, posts also.
Yeah, it was sort of, if you have read H.P. Lovecraft's classic novella, At the Mountains of Madness, right, what would have happened in that universe 30 years later? Well, you know, you have this expedition to the Antarctic that discovers shoggoths and dead cities and elder ones and all sorts of stuff in the late 1920s to early 30s. Well, it's obvious. In the 1930s, there will be a series of follow-on expeditions run by the Nazis, by the Soviets, by everybody who can get there, basically. And they'll be looting anything they can find. Then there'll be a serious unpleasantness in Europe, and after which, well, the phrase, "We cannot permit a Shoggoth gap to arise, Mr. President," is uttered in the story. And it occurred to me, you know, that particular story was very, very grim and bleak because World War III happens and Cthulhu is one of the weapons used in it. It really doesn't end happily. But if you've seen Dr. Strangelove, you know it's possible to make serious humour out of the most horrific subjects. So I decided, okay, I'm going to write a humorous British spy thriller with tentacles. Lots of tentacles. And that's basically where the laundry books come from. Our hero, Bob, is a sandal-wearing computer geek who accidentally discovered something he wasn't meant to discover. Namely that we live in a multiverse and mathematics is real and has power. There are entities elsewhere in the multiverse who will hear and possibly react if you solve the wrong theorems. And computers are machines for doing lots of mathematical theorem proving very fast. He nearly landscaped a small British city while working on his thesis, and the upshot was he was conscripted by a secret arm of the British government whose basic job is to keep the scum of the multiverse out. And it's gone on from one book to the next. There are also, to some extent, pastiches or tributes to British spy thriller writers. The Atrocity Archives was the Len Dayton novel. The Jennifer Morgue was the Ian Fleming James Bond novel. This was the Anthony Price novel. I'm currently working on the Modesty Blaze tribute novel in the series.
We're all looking forward to that.
Yep.
And then we have what we're working up to today, Halting State, which you mentioned at the beginning here.
Okay, Halting State was an odd book. I was working as a programmer and as a technical author with games industry programmers in other areas over the years, and got a bit of a feel for what was going on. I was going drinking with games programmers, and I was hearing a lot of stuff about massively multiplayer online gaming around the late 90s to early noughties. And things finally hit me that there was a book in this when I ran across two observations. The first, a report of a guy who had gone into a police station in London to file a crime report. So, what crime are you alleging has occurred, says the sergeant behind the desk. Well, I bought this magic sword on eBay, only it's not enchanted. It took the confused cop about half an hour to get to the meat of the matter, which was that a crime had actually happened. It was fraud. The person in question had bought an in-game item for an online role-playing game on eBay, and when received and deployed in the game, it did not actually have the attributes attributed to it in the auction. So there was clearly an act of fraud there, but I suddenly realised, hang on, crime. The other thing that hit me was discovering that I think it was Ultimate Online, by some estimates, based on the amount of money exchanging hands for in-game items, around 2003 had about the same gross national product as Austria.
I think that was EverQuest actually.
What?
I think it was EverQuest.
Might have been EverQuest, yeah. Of course it wasn't truly exchangeable. If you tried to exchange that much money, the value of the game contents would crash. But there was something weird going on there. And finally, the observation that these MMOs were the first commercially viable form of virtual reality. Thank you, William Gibson. Okay, crime caper novel set in the real virtual universe. And that's what that one is.
And then, well, I hear from the publishers that tomorrow we'll have your next novel out here.
Rule 34. Now, Haunting State was a near future novel set about 10 years out. When I wrote it in 2005, it was set around 2017. And I had this interesting cast of characters set in a near future version of my home city, Edinburgh, and I thought I could do a bit more with this universe. And then Haunting State went on to sell so well that my editor says, can you write me one just like that one, only different? There's a theme here, isn't there? So I sat down to think about it, and the answer was yes and no. I couldn't use all the same characters. The only characters in common with Haunting State and Rule 34 are minor characters. And I'd written the gaming book. I was going to do something different. Rule 34 is a Scottish police procedural novel about crimes that don't exist yet. Quite a few different types of crime, and quite a few different types of very, very weird and not very nice criminal. I probably shouldn't say too much more about it because it's not fair to you, you can't buy it yet. Come back on Monday.
When you wrote Haunting State, I read some complaints in your blog about the hardships of inventing near future tech, because the morning after you've invented something, you read about it in the morning paper.
Yeah, the only piece of tech in that novel that the only pieces of tech in the novel that haven't come true are the call centres used to drive remotely piloted cars, and I think we may well see them within 5 to 10 years. Google is certainly working in that direction. And the quantum computer. And as a company called D-Wave just sold what is purports to be a quantum computer to Lockheed for research and development for $20 million US, that was last month, I think we're on course for Haunting State to pretty much have come true on schedule. And some of the big cyber attacks. Yes, to a certain extent. I was getting ready to begin writing the new book, Rule 34. Well, it was going to be called 419 back then. And I had this elaborate crime caper in which a bunch of crooks were going to take the EU and the US for 10 billion euros on samband when 2008's banking crisis hit, and a fellow called Bernie Madoff turned out to have taken everybody for 5 times as much money. So I basically contacted my agent and editor and said, can we swap the order of the next 2 books, because this one's going to be obsolete before I finish writing it. So I had to wait for things to settle down a bit before I could actually write Rule 34. And they did settle down, and I had to do a whole load of reinventing the plot before I could go ahead with it. But yeah. The technology, well, I've tried to steer away from stuff that's, how to put it, when writing about the near future, the one thing you can say is it's going to embed the present day. Almost everything that's around today will be around in 10 years' time. Some things will have changed. Slide rules are pretty much obsolete, as are trigonometry tables. Sorry. Pocket calculators have killed them. I suspect smartphones are going to kill pocket calculators in due course, but it'll be a long drawn-out death. But mostly, new technology, new developments don't kill old ones. DVD players have sort of replaced video VHS players, but it's the same niche. Meanwhile, we still go to the theatre, we still have opera, we still have cinema, even though we have television and now YouTube. So the near future is going to look very, very like the present, but there will be other stuff in it that we can't predict necessarily. Clothing fashions change, car design changes, but the really weird stuff is stuff that defies prediction. If you took a random person off the street from, say, 1961 and dropped them down in Stockholm today, they'd look around, they'd see people wearing funny clothing, but not that funny, you know. They wouldn't see people eating food pills, but they'd see Japanese restaurants everywhere. They'd see oddly melted-looking cars, but they'd still recognise they're in Stockholm, and that's a shop, and that's a hotel, and that's a restaurant, and that's a bar. It would all be familiar, except, well, most people aren't wearing hats, and why is everybody walking around with these small, strange, glowing card deck type things pinned to their faces? What's that about? The internet would have been completely invisible. And yet, if you push a little bit further into the future, it's going to be virtually impossible to file a tax return or pay your rent or whatever, or deal with a bank without the internet. So your 1961 time traveller is going to find themselves in a world that looks superficially familiar, yet where they simply are incapable of functioning without knowledge of stuff that's emerged only in the past decade. And I think that's the trick to writing near future SF. 90% of it is exactly the same. 9% of it, fashion change. 1%, unutterably weird. Why are people walking around with tentacles coming out of their backs? Something of that order of strangeness. And that's sort of where it's going and how you do it.
And then I wonder if any of you guys have any questions to Charlie.
Many, but no easy ones. So.
Yeah.
Nah.
Pick one.
Go ahead, you're the only one here with that.
I'm the only one with a question, really. Can I buy a pint? No, that's for later, I think. You're never going to write the organ, saintly organ book, are you?
The saintly organ? No. I do not need death threats from the Vatican or Catholic believers. This was a very, very, very stupid book idea that I ended up posting in a list of books I will not write on my blogging. It turns out that from some naivish interpretations of Catholic doctrine, saints' relics acquire holy properties and possibly magical properties the instant the person is sainted. So what happens if you have a kidney transplant from a priest who dies shortly thereafter, and 5 years later the Vatican rushes through the canonization? You're walking around with a holy relic embedded in you, at which point the Vatican surgeons are coming for you.
I just got that picture from The Meaning of Life with Monty Python.
Oh yeah.
Nobody expects the Vatican surgeon.
Yes.
That's cool.
Liver transplants.
And we were speculating as to what particular power the holy kidney might have. For example, could you be pissing holy water so that you could just piss on vampires? But yeah, this is essentially frivolous.
Yeah. But fun.
Yeah.
I think your editor would have a slight problem with that.
Yeah. You, sir?
Do you have any more short stories coming out? But I really like your short stories.
I'm not writing very many of them at present. There's been 2 in the past year. One in a collection edited by Nick Peevers, the title of which evades me. It was basically set in the same universe as Saturn's Children.
Engineering Infinity, right?
Yeah, that's it, yeah. Basically it's about cannibal robot zombies in space. And one other story, which was in an anthology, a smallish anthology edited by Ian Waits called Fables from the Fount. It's a tribute to Arthur C. Clarke's Tales from the White Hart, to raise funds for the Clarke Award. And Michael Swanick said that all science fiction stories can be improved by the additions of dinosaurs and sodomy. I applied this to an Arthur C. Clarke White Hart story. It does actually work.